Hey everybody in Humanities 107, checking back in for our last video lecture of the semester, believe it or not. After this week, we will just have the final exam, final essay to work on. No new content after this last couple of days of April, first couple of days of May. So you won't be seeing me on YouTube any longer, at least presumably not. You never know. Regardless, should cover some class-related business here before we get too much further. So you have one last week of discussion boards. I'm recording this on Monday night, April 27th. I will have those discussion board posts up probably before this is even on YouTube for any of you to check it out. So just make sure that you leave your comment by Thursday evening and your post by Thursday evening and your comments by Sunday evening. I'm changing perspectives. Oh, am I too washed out here? Yeah, that'll do. Who cares? You all don't need to be looking at my face that much anyway. So discussion board, one last week of that this week, and then you've got your final essay proposal, which is due by April 29th. So that's Wednesday evening of this week. If you're watching this after Wednesday evening, make sure you get that final essay proposal in as soon as possible so that I can grade it and give you written feedback on it. And that is something that I will be writing on everybody's final proposal. You can find it through the Turnitin app. If you don't know where to find it, if you're having trouble finding it, feel free to reach out to me and I can point you in the right direction or just copy paste my comments over into an email. But I do want you to see my feedback since that's part of why we do the proposal phase. Just to, what's the word I'm looking for? Just as a way to help sharpen up your ideas, formulate your thesis, especially help you out with any structural ideas, that sort of thing. So, yeah, proposal, which is topic, thesis, outline, and bibliography, that is due by Wednesday, April 29th at midnight. And then after that, we'll have a final exam that you'll take on Brightspace, just like we did the midterm exam back in the early part of March. Was that early March? Was that really less than 2 months ago? That feels like a bajillion years ago you all took that midterm exam on Brightspace. I honestly would not. It feels like it could have been 6 months ago. God, this lockdown has been lunatic. Anyway, so you'll have your final exam on Brightspace, and that actually leads to one of the discussion board topics for this week. Just like we did with the midterm, I would love to have you create some questions for the final exam, even in a way that's not as collaborative, unfortunately, as we might have liked. Though feel free to comment on each other's posts and ideas. That could be a great way to kind of finesse those exam questions. But yeah, that'll be one of the discussion board topics for this week, so feel free to jump in there and take care of that. Yeah, you'll earn. I'm planning to actually make that into a small degree of extra credit beyond the basic sort of discussion board post for this week. You'll earn extra points if I wind up using your question, and then you'll have your final essay, which takes the ideas that you've worked out in your proposal and expands them into full academic essay format. That will be due by midnight on Sunday, May 10th. Sunday, May 10th is when the final essay is due. Sunday, May 10th is also the last day that I'll be accepting any new work. So if you've got old discussion board posts, old essays, anything like that, it has to be in by midnight on Sunday, May 10th. After that, the gates are closed and I will just be grading. Beyond that, I don't think I have anything else. I'll be on Zoom these next 2 weeks during our scheduled meeting times. Feel free to pop in, even if you don't have a question. I'd love to say farewell as our semester wraps up in this very strange way. So yeah, uh, let me know. You don't even have to let me know. Just pop into Zoom, say hey, and if you don't get a chance to do that, don't want to do that, I understand that as well. Best of luck with everything in the future, and I hope you were able to pick up quite a bit from this class, even in the odd form that it had to take. And I hope everybody in your life stays safe and healthy for the duration of this tumultuous time that we're facing here. All right. So, all of that being said, we've still got a bit more content to talk about, and it is building directly off of the content from last week. We were talking about the internet, the rise of this dramatically powerful and still pretty young technology. And it's something that has obviously had an enormous impact on popular culture, on how we communicate, how we view our entertainment, how we think and learn. The implications of the internet are vast and will not be understood in all honesty for decades or more likely centuries. People will write history books 200 years from now assessing how the internet remade human society in the early 2000s, assuming civilization lasts that long. I knocked on wood. We want it to last. It's not perfect, but civilization is nice. So all that being said, there are some aspects of uh, how we use the internet, or maybe alternately how the internet uses us, that I think are maybe, I don't know if they're underappreciated per se, but they are the sort of thing that can easily slide under the rug, that don't necessarily announce themselves. That actually, that comes from Neil Postman, where he says that new technologies do not announce how they will work or what their intentions are. They don't pause to tell us, and we do not pause to ask. So that's something that we should pause to ask about in an academic setting like this one. That's exactly what we propose to do, right? So, on that note, the readings this week are definitely more on the burden side of how the internet is affecting American life and popular culture, and that's perfectly fine. That's, sometimes you need to wade through some of the downsides, because I think in our normal everyday lives we're probably pretty familiar with the benefits that the internet has provided. I'm looking forward to reading through your comments and thoughts about all of that. So why don't we start on the topic of surveillance? Two of the readings this week have to do with how our internet usage gets tracked and what that means. One of them has to do with what you might call state surveillance. By state surveillance, I mean the way that our government, but also a lot of other governments, are able to track who we are, where we are, who we communicate with, what we communicate on through internet enabled devices. This is something that is extremely common. It's not as invasive as I think the worst case scenarios would maybe prompt you to think, but it is still something that's quite common and is, I think, a certain cause for alarm. This was major news a couple of years back when Edward Snowden, who had worked for the National Security Administration, defected from the United States and unleashed a bunch of classified information about how his former employer, the National Security Administration, used warrantless surveillance procedures to collect what's called metadata about Americans and about basically everybody who used the internet on Earth, which is to say most people on Earth these days. And actually, that is, or the word metadata, excuse me, the word metadata, I should say, is perhaps the key concept behind this, and this is actually a pretty good idea for you to carry around in the future. Metadata is essentially the tiny metadata and associated digital tool called cookies are the little thumbprints that we leave all around the internet whenever we visit a website, use an app, log on to a new device, send a message, all of these sorts of things. They just create little, marks wherever you go. That's a way for the internet service provider you use to have a sense of what you're doing. It provides a way, usually nominally, that's not supposed to be creepy. nominally. And it's also a way for websites and apps to have a sense of where their users are so they can try to cater their products towards them. But it's also something that's collected by the government in order to try and track illegal activities. They say that they don't snoop into people's private communications, that they would never do that, that they respect the Constitution and our First Amendment rights. You can believe that as far as you want to. I'm kind of trusting even now, even today, but I I think it's worth having some misgivings here, especially because, I don't think the United States is a totalitarian or authoritarian society, but there certainly are internet heavy societies that are authoritarian or totalitarian, and the internet has been used in those societies in ways that are genuinely kind of unsettling from my perspective. China, for example, tracks people through metadata to some degree, but also through traditional surveillance like internet connected cameras, and gives them what they call, oh, I forget the exact term, it's something like a good citizenship score. If you pick up trash, if you don't spit, if you obey traffic signals, if you, all of these sorts of like common decency things, those all get tracked and tallied up, and if you get a good score, you get like tax breaks or something like that, or maybe a stipend from the government. And I get why you would do that. It gives people an incentive to behave better, but also you're using digital surveillance to do that. It also kind of turns, people into lab rats who are just being poked and prodded. It's a little creepy. And there's much more extreme examples. In the United States, though, I'm honestly a little less concerned about state surveillance, more concerned about corporate surveillance, especially when it comes to advertising. This is what the article, The Daily U, dives into. Corporate surveillance in this context means not that corporations are spying on you per se, but they are able to track how you use the internet, what you use it for, when you use it, etc., 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 and turn that into a very complete psychological profile and demographic profile in order to try and sell you shit. The article lays out very convincing scenarios for like a family of four who continually get emails with promotions for fast food restaurants. They use the coupons, but they wind up spending more than the coupons value, which means the restaurant makes a profit. And this happens in a continuous cycle because the restaurant knows these are people who are our key demographic. They consume our product. They have been susceptible to these promotions before. Let's keep sending them this shit and thereby getting revenue back. And I understand the psychology there. That is advertising 101, entice a customer, of course, but it is reliant upon knowing, for example, what ads you click on, what websites you visit, what emails you open. That to me is a step further than maybe more traditional advertising that's related to this. Something like the spam mail that you get through the US Postal Service. I get a ton of like restaurant menus. None of those restaurants have any idea if I've ever ordered from them. They're just spamming every address up and down the block in the hopes that they'll get a couple of orders. Whereas, Grubhub knows exactly what I've ordered. They tell me what I've ordered going back years and years since I first used Grubhub. I actually wonder what my first. I almost want to go look up what my first order ever on Grubhub was and when, but then I would be a little creeped out because they know and I don't, or at least their server knows. And that's really valuable information. Grubhub has a really strong sense of what my wife and I order. Grubhub also knows every address I've lived at for the last decade. Same is true of Amazon. Same is true of Facebook. Same is true of Twitter and YouTube. All of them track our information to create a consumer profile of us so that they can sell me more ebooks on Kindle so they can sell my wife maybe more stuff for home projects. My kids will start getting advertisements in very short order if they're not already. My son actually already, when he watches YouTube, he'll scream, commercial, commercial. So I run over and like click the thing. He has literally been trained by YouTube to know the difference between stuff that he likes to watch and commercials. He's 3. It's a little alarming once I say it out loud. And I do think this is one of those things that is very normal and natural and maybe even beneficial to some degree for consumers these days. But it's not something that we had much choice in. And that's actually something that I think is worth thinking about for a minute here. We are a democratic society, right? We make choices about our leaders in order to have a say in how our country proceeds. We make choices. That is the obligation of a citizen to be a well informed person who makes choices about the future of their country. And yet we had no choice when it came to the adoption of things like corporate and state surveillance through the internet. That was something that was not on the ballot, so to speak. Um, and that's problematic and maybe symptomatic as well. It is a symptom of how American pop culture has changed in ways that are built directly off of how the internet changes us and ways that are maybe more general issues in our culture. The other articles this week have to do with other internet related behaviors, and actually related once again to politics. They have to do with the concepts of online activism and social bubbles. These are both things. I was just making sure I had my notes correct there. These are both things that come up for debate with some frequency, especially in an electoral season, which of course we are in. Joe Biden has won the Democratic primary since, the lockdown began, and we are looking at a matchup between him and Trump in the fall. And that means that you're going to see, if you're not already, a ton of people in your social media feeds posting endlessly about politics. Hello. I'm not as bad as maybe I once was, but it's a lot. And that also means that you are going to be seeing a lot of people trying to poke and prod you or guilt you perhaps in what they're posting, how they're posting it. They'll try and get you to like their post. And they won't say like this post. We don't like being forced like that. But people know how to manipulate their posts through language, that sort of passive way that gets you to like it or share it or retweet it or whatever. That's what the one author, whose name unfortunately I forget, calls slacktivism, where you're not taking an active role in society, volunteering, canvassing, doing things that maybe more tangibly affect the world. You're just relying on the belief that if you post enough, if you comment enough, you will have made a difference. And that's not to say that you won't make any difference, but it's certainly not the same as traditional activism. It's something that's just a couple of keystrokes or mouse clicks or thumb swipes rather than, walk. Not that you could during the lockdown, going door to door, knocking, talking to voters, those sorts of things. And that's yeah, the jury is still out about whether or not that sort of thing is helpful slacktivism. The jury is definitely in when it comes to the influence of the internet on elections. There's some pretty persuasive data out there that in 2012, President Obama's reelection may have been helped just by the fact that Facebook encouraged people to vote, reminded them to vote, and because Facebook's user base back then was predominantly younger, that pushed more young voters out to the polls and may have helped President Obama add to his victory back in 2012. It would be inarguable to me that Trump's victory in 2016 was not aided by the internet. His army of trolls online, as well as the digital interference that was enabled by Russia and just by the way social media has evolved. You may have seen some of the controversy a couple of months ago. Twitter banned all political advertising because they're having so much trouble telling truth from falsehoods when it came to political advertising. And Facebook has taken the opposite tactic. They also said it's too difficult for us to be the jury and the judge and say what's true and what's false, so we are just going to not enforce any standards of truth on Facebook. We'll take everyone's money and let you decide if you're being lied to. That's not what I would have done. I hope. I hope. So the internet Online discourse definitely does influence real life, especially when it comes to things like activism, politics, these sorts of things. But I think the internet might also, to a degree that we're only starting to understand, insulate us from real life. This is a topic that came up quite a lot after the 2016 election, and I think will come up with some frequency this year as well. The idea of social bubbles or other forms of social isolation, I guess you would say, due to the way the internet operates. If you are an active social media user and you have a strong feeling about politics, but maybe about almost anything else, about sports, about certain celebrities, anything, fashion, whatever, you will probably cultivate a news feed through your social media that excludes most contrary opinions. Sometimes that is an active choice that you make if you've ever unfriended someone or blocked someone because of you disagreed with them about something. That would be an example of, closing yourself off from certain perspective, certain language, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I have done the same, and I think genuinely it can be very healthy to not have toxic people spewing bullshit in your newsfeed. Um, but it does also mean that perhaps you're not speaking to people on the other side of certain social, political, economic, racial, ethnic, or class divides. Your newsfeed tends to look a lot like you, for lack of a better way of putting it. And just to go to politics as an example there, in my personal sphere, thinking back to like the Democratic primary, it felt like Elizabeth Warren was going to win in a landslide based on who my friends are and how we feel about things. Obviously, that did not happen. She lost pretty resoundingly. Didn't do better than third place in any state. Oh, breaks my heart. But in my particular news feed, especially on Facebook, where I've cultivated it even more closely, she was by far the favorite. That is a bubble. And I knew I was in that bubble, and I knew that the numbers were not on my side, but it was still what I saw. And that became my expectation. Kind of going back to the idea that we talked about with TV last week, the internet in this case had created a reality for me. You have created your own reality in the way you cultivate your friends list and your followers list, in the way you retweet or share things, because all of those provide data points for social media, for your web browser, for the companies who are tracking you through your cookies, in order to and that leads to changes in the algorithms, and that changes the stories you see, the photos you see, the news that you get. um, all of that has an influence on your media diet in the way that older forms of media like TV and newsprint and radio did not. Those were just, here's the information our editors and our reporters picked and you have no choice. The internet gives you a choice, but you can choose to cut yourself off, which can be good, but maybe has side effects that, like I said, we haven't fully reckoned with. All right, that is all for now. I know I've run to 23 minutes. Thank you all for sticking it out. Like I said, good luck with the end of the semester here and with everything that you do in the future. And I hope everybody in your life stays safe and healthy. Thanks so much.